This is a football show, normally Monday edition, but we're coming to you on a Tuesday. Happy Memorial Day weekend out there to all of you wonderful folks. My name's Braden. He's Zach. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. SEC seeding charts are out in Destin for the spring meeting, so we're going to get to that. Fantasy football for your Tennessee Titans. Who is worth drafting, Zach? We will get to that, and where, maybe the more important question for some of these guys. But really, the big part of the show today, we're going to focus on statistical analysis of this Tennessee Titans offense. What should expectations be for all of the biggest players on this offense? And frankly, overall, Zach, what the offense should look like. So a lot of stuff to do today on the show, even though we got a little bit of a day off. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Of course, you can follow me at Braden Gall, at FWordsPod, BroadwaySportsMedia.com. And where should people be chiming in and getting involved in the show, Zach?
They should be heading over to the YouTube channel for the 440 Sports. Get in on the YouTube, get in on the comments, share everything, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it on MySpace, wherever our show is brought to you at share it.
MySpace.
Yeah.
I like that. Also, of course, special thanks to our title sponsor that brings you this great show each and every normal Monday and Thursday. The Kingston Group, buildkg.com is the website. You can see that logo right there up in the screen, right up there. There it is right there above me. The Kingston Group, Nashville's locally owned custom home and remodeling firm. If you're going to make a big decision, we try to tell you this every time. Don't make any big decisions about your house without talking to the experts, people that can help you, usher you through the process, and shepherd you through the process, which Zach is going to do for you fantasy football players today.
Oh, yeah.
On the show.
Little bit better fantasy football.
Yes, Capology and fantasy football. Those are two of your many areas of expertise. And again, Broadway Sports Media on the Facebook page. You got 440 Sports on the YouTube page. Wherever you're following us, we love the interaction. We do appreciate you guys supporting us. And again, check out buildkg.com. We are not in studio today, as you can tell. I'm sitting in my home office, as Zach is as well. Would you like to tell all the good folks why we are at home today?
Got a freaking furniture delivery. Memorial Day weekend was this weekend, so I got a furniture delivery that the time frame is between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. So
come on with that.
There we go.
That's the best they could do? That's ridiculous.
And they told me that I was like 17th on the truck in delivery, but they didn't know when the truck was actually going to start because they outsourced the delivery. So it's just, classic furniture delivery shenanigans.
Absolutely ridiculous. We'll also have some SEC stuff a little bit later on. As again, I joke about the seating chart, but it is out. We've got access to the seating chart. Jimbo Fisher is in the principal's office for sure. So we'll joke about that. But also we've got, what exactly do we expect to come out of these meetings? I think there's some very specific things that fans can expect to come out of this week. So we'll see about that. That's a little bit later on the show as well. So normally we're in our Cast Collective studio. Again, Cast_Collective, of course, on the Instagram. All right, Zach, why is it that you were so set on analyzing the Titans' offensive productions? What was it that got you going on this? Let's start there.
Well, basically, it's good content. I feel like it's a good discussion because when you really look at it, you have ESPN has hired Mike Clay, and he goes in and does this projection for all 32 teams, and he's constantly updating it based on things he's seen that happens on the teams, the stuff that he sees on social media, on the videos, the practices and stuff like that. So it's a good baseline. I wouldn't say that it's 100% accurate, but he tends to be pretty close to on the money in some of his projections for both the offense, and he does do one for the defense as well. And I think that kind of doing an over-under, we used to do it on Football Under the F Words when it was me and Mike would do it over the summer. And so this year I figured, let's see if Braden can hang with the big boys over here.
Well, I do think it's critical, though, to understand what expectations should be for an offense. I think a lot of Titans fans got in over their skis when Tannehill came in 2019 and was so good in the back, 3 quarters of that season, right after the Denver game where Mariota gets benched, and he was so good that I think fans were like, oh, this is the way it's going to be now. And generally, and I'm not an MIT expert here on mathematics, but generally statistical outliers trend back towards the norm at some point in general. And I don't think Titans fans, maybe I'm wrong on this, you tell me, I think a lot of them just expected Ryan Tannehill specifically, or even the passing offense or the offense in general, to sort of maintain this like elite level that they had for a short period of time. I think they can be better than they were last year, but I think it's important to sort of set a baseline because I think a lot of Titans fans got into 2020 and were a little disappointed about the offensive production. Certainly last year, people were disappointed even more so. So does that make sense? Like, I think it's important to set a bar for where statistical expectations should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the offensive. I think in 2020 the offense exactly what I think it hit all the right marks. I mean, you have a 2,000-yard rusher. Ryan Tannehill maintained his level of efficiency. At the time, you're talking about a top 10 quarterback in Ryan Tannehill in 2020, arguably top 5, just because of his efficiency metrics, his stats. Maybe his box score wasn't there for everybody's liking, but you're talking about still an efficient player. Interceptions were still low, touchdowns were still high.
Right.
Everything that you want from maybe not necessarily a fantasy standpoint, even though he was a relatively good fantasy quarterback in 2020, but everything you want to see from your quarterback. And then 2021 happens, and I think everybody has now gone from Ryan Tannehill's the guy to Ryan Tannehill's not the guy, but not taking into account that the offensive line stunk in 2021. There was no Derrick Henry for more than half the year. No A.J. Brown in and out of the lineup. Julio Jones in and out of the lineup. I mean, it was a complete and utter disaster and a mess.
Aaron Dugan chiming in, host of Fringe Element podcast. Definitely not an MIT guy. I appreciate that. That's so nice of you, Aaron. If you'd like to listen to her insult me more, which many people would, make sure you're tuned into Fringe Element podcast. That one's coming out on Thursday this week, of course, with all the news coming out of Destin. What's interesting is that I think this is the important point here. 2020, Tannehill did take a step back in almost every major category from 2019, but to your point, was still very good. So I think there was a regression, and then the regression got significantly worse. And so I think that's what's important, and this is what's key here. Even in 2019, they were only 21st in yards per game, which to me is like using an abacus to calculate offensive efficiency in the NFL. Like, yards per game in college and pro football is not important to me. Like, I don't care if the Titans were 21st in passing offense, then 23rd in 2020, and then 24th last year. Like, those are basically the same. Like the key is how you got to those numbers. And they were first in the NFL in 2019 in yards per attempt. They were 7th in yards per attempt in 2020, and then they were 18th last year. So clearly a big step back. They were 2nd in touchdown percentage 2 years ago. They were 4th in touchdown percentage in 2020, 16th in touchdown percentage last year. So you can see it's the efficiency metrics that got significantly worse last year for Tannehill. And that is, to me, what's important to look at and set the benchmark for. I don't care if he throws for 225 yards a game. I don't care. Like, that would be considered nothing. That's a half a football for Patrick Mahomes. But I don't care about that number. I want it to be yards per attempt, touchdown percentage, and protect the football.
Well, the number that really matters is touchdowns, right? I mean, that's the stat that really matters, both in fantasy football and in real life, because you only win games by scoring points, and the way to score points is either touchdowns or field goals, and you want this team to score touchdowns. You know, obviously last year he was getting sacked. He had no one to hardly throw to. I think he had there was like 11 drops, and 2 of them were AJ, and a lot of them were touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous, the stuff that he had to go through in 2021. And I think that in 2022, you're going to see a little bit different. And you talk about, what the stats could look like. Here's Mike Clay's projection, which is 3,641 yards, 22 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 5 rush touchdowns. I disagree with a lot of what you're going to say. I think there's going to be more rush touchdowns, less interceptions, more touchdowns. The yards, it's kind of a crapshoot with yards. It could be 3,700, it could be 3,500. Right. Really matter? Probably not.
No, and I think that's important because, like, again, the rushing numbers, and we'll get to Henry in a second, but the rushing numbers are basically the same, right? They are 3rd, 2nd, and 5th in the NFL the last 3 years. That's, even if it's a little bit different, it's still very consistent. When you look at red zone production, they're one of the best red zone teams in the world. like if you look at they were 1st, 2nd, 5th. They've been a top 5 red zone offense the last 3 years. 3rd down percentage, they went from 18th to 5th to 8th last year. So even as they struggled last year, still a really good 3rd down defense. So it's just that passing efficiency metric that is the number we're kind of focused on with Ryan Tannehill. And if he throws for 3,600 yards, I'm fine with that. If he scores 30 total touchdowns, to your point about rushing, I'm totally fine with that. I want that 14 interceptions to be down around 8 or 9. And
Well,
if
and you
that's
want
the
the
case, then
sacks
it's a
to go
great year.
down too. I mean, obviously he got sacked a lot last year, and he's kind of projecting maybe 41 sacks, which is 47 last year. But you look at this, if you look at this from a box score perspective, right? Just a general view that what you're seeing right here is technically probably worse than what it was last year, because you're talking about technically a healthier offensive skill players all the way around. Better Austin Hooper, better than anything they had last year. You got Robert Woods as the number 2 wide receiver, better than anything they had last year. And then Kyle Phillips, Nick Westbrook-Akine, a healthy Derrick Henry, and this is what you're gonna come up with. 21 touchdowns last year and 14 interceptions last year. So he gains 1 touchdown, less yards than last year. Don't really care. But 5 rush touchdowns compared to 7 last year. Again, I just think that these are really downplaying what the Titans have done on offense this year. And you see that everywhere. Football Outsiders puts out, their little Titans hate of the week, where they say that the Titans pass catchers are a bottom 3 in the NFL, which is kind of ridiculous to me when you really think about it, because there's a lot worse than them. And I think that what you're going to see is Ryan Tannehill bounce back to probably 2020 form Ryan Tannehill, where you're going to get his touchdowns in the 30s. You're going to get his interceptions in the single digits, and probably still have the rush touchdowns you're looking for, which would be, I would say, roughly probably 7 again. I mean, he's had 7 the last 2 years. So if you get all that, then you're back in, you're talking about an offense that is not only viable to be an AFC contender, but also viable in fantasy football.
Well, and again, if they're going to be really good on red zone, because they've already established that, no matter who's calling plays, right? We already know how good they are at that. You can sort of count on Ryan Tannehill finishing drives. Like, I think that's something we can count on. So if you add 2 passing touchdowns, or 3 from last year, and he even drops back 1 in the rushing category, that still puts him at 30 total for the season. So I think 30 is the number I'm shooting for if I'm a fan. I want to see 30 total touchdowns with fewer than 10 interceptions. And if he does that, I think it's going to be considered an excellent regular season. My question to you is, I don't think your expectations are unreasonable at all. The question is, does that translate to postseason success? And
Yes.
That's the question we just don't know the answer to.
Well, it will. Right? I mean, we saw last year that when his interceptions are up and his offensive line is terrible, he's awful, right? So if both those things change throughout the regular season and in the postseason, then you're looking at something it's a little bit. I think what this projection is not taking into account, and maybe what a lot of people tend to forget, it's kind of like when Jim Schwartz joined the Titans staff last year. Kind of people would remember and then they would quickly forget. Tim Kelly's addition, I think, changes everything for this offense.
Yep.
And I think that these stats do not reflect Tim Kelly's influence on this offense.
Yeah, and if you want, we have an episode for you about Tim Kelly's influence on the offense. I want to say 3 or 4 episodes ago. Make sure you go check that out. You did a deep dive on, there's also a great article on Broadway Sports Media about Tim Kelly's effect on the offense as well. It's more first down passing, more 11 personnel, all that kind of stuff. If you want to go deep dive, just check it out, previous episodes. Tim chimes in here on the comments. Defense will be top 5 this year. Offense will be just outside the top 10. DH bounces back and goes for 2K this year. Let's freaking go. All right, here's my question. First of all, do you want Derrick Henry to get to 2,000 yards? Like, do you think that's because that'd be fun, but
I don't think so. I think that, I mean, we did see 2 years ago in 2020 that Derrick Henry's 2,000-yard season actually produced a better season for Ryan Tannehill statistically, right? 33 touchdowns, through the air, 3,800 yards, 7 interceptions, 7 rush touchdowns. So in my mind, there's not I don't think there's a need for it, but I also don't think that it's going to be possible because of how this offense is going to be constructed. You look at what Mike Clay has put down, 353 carries seems about right. 1,500 yards seems a little wrong to me. I mean, you're talking about 4.2 yards per carry. and 11 touchdowns. I think both those are low again. And I think you're probably looking at like 375 in carries when it's all said and done. I think
Man, it's
I think you're
that's a lot of
looking at
touches.
well, it's going to be a lot of touches because that's what you have Mike Vrabel here to do.
You
I
know, I
mean, Mike
understand.
Vrabel is going to rush the football. I think that you're looking at probably, I think, a 1,700-yard season, and I think you're going to get at least 15 rush touchdowns.
I think that's fair. And Tim, by the way, also says he doesn't want Derrick Henry to go. So he thinks it's going to happen, but he doesn't want it to happen. I think that's really, really interesting because I don't know like where people are. And we did a long conversation about the decline of Derrick Henry a couple episodes ago. Zach, I don't know where people are on using him. How much do you want to use him? Do you care if you use him up in 2 years and let him go? Would you rather use him less and run Haskins more? And I think Hilliard actually is going to play a really nice role for this team. I actually really like his skill set. Haskins is I can comment on this after seeing him on practice, and we'll be out there tomorrow as well. Haskins does not fight the football in the air at all. He is a great hands catcher of the football. So while he may not be super fast and he may be built to go between the tackles in that outside zone scheme that they like, he is very good, very natural pass catcher, way more so than Derrick Henry. So the key is, can you find ways to trim his carries down to maybe extend his life, the tread on his tires here in Nashville? And I don't know if I want 375 touches from Derrick Henry. Maybe I want those spread out a little bit more this year.
I would love for them to be spread out. I just don't think that's how this team is gonna funnel the offense. It's just I look at it this way. I look at what is Mike Vrabel, what is this team gonna want to do, and they have shown that it doesn't really matter who's back there. Now, granted, maybe Hassan Haskins is better than anything they've ever had behind Derrick Henry, right? But it's still a rookie running back who can't mess up pass protection, right? Because if you mess up pass protection or if you fumble, they're going to take you out of the game, and they're not going to play you. They have to be able to rely on you. And what I look at through the history of this Mike Vrabel football team is that I just don't think they give a shit about anything other than Derrick Henry's going to get a lot of touches, and we would rather win games 13-10 than win games 50-7. And I ultimately, because you see how good the defense is, I think that unless Henry gets injured, I think, again, you're down. Mike Clay is playing it really safe. Because I think you're looking at potentially the guy in the NFL yet again that leads in rush yards and leads in rush touchdowns.
I think if the Titans do not give a shit like you're talking about his future and the next contract or whatever that means, right?
And let's be honest, they really shouldn't.
No, and you're probably right. They shouldn't. Then I'm fine with just feed the dude the ball, man. Just feed him 28 times the way they were doing last year. The problem is does that lead to wear and tear issues again, we don't know for sure if the foot was because he had so many carries in the first half of the season. But even taking a step back, what was the talking point all of last offseason? Well, we know the offense is going to take a slight step back, but if the defense can just be middle of the pack, they'll be great, right? Like that was the talking point. And now it's inverted. Now we need the offense to just be like 12th or 13th in the NFL in efficiency across the board because we know they're going to be a top 5 rushing offense. And I don't care if that is 400 touches for Derrick Henry or 300 touches for Derrick Henry with 100 for Hilliard and Haskins. Like I don't care if they get to 25 rushing touchdowns with Derrick Henry having all 18 or with Ryan Tannehill with 10. I don't care. I want them to be top 5 in rushing like they have been each of the last 3 years. And again, to your point, maybe I'm too caught up in what's the future of Derrick Henry with the team, and do I want to see him play here for 2 more years after the 2 years on his contract? Like, I kind of do, but I probably shouldn't think like that, right?
Yeah, I think you just got to look at it in a vacuum, every season in a vacuum, because you don't know what this team technically is going to do. Hell, they could trade Derrick Henry at any point during this offseason not this offseason, but during the season. You know what I'm saying? They could end up trading him if they think they really like Hassan Haskins. Do I think that's a stretch? I think it's a definite stretch, but we have seen this team put players out there or do things to try to make the team better. And technically, I think having Henry on the field makes the team better than not having Henry on the field. Obviously,
earth shattering stuff here. The Titans perhaps are better when Derrick Henry's on the field than when he is not.
And I think that Derrick
This is why
Henry's
you come to this show.
Yeah, I think that Derrick Henry is also going to prove that last year was a fluke, and he's going to be play all the games that he's made available for.
I would here, and I'll save this for fantasy because I have a very clear strategy around Derrick Henry if I'm a fantasy player. So we'll save that to when we get to the fantasy side. Good segue here from Stoney. Should the Titans add another weapon, a receiver, or is the group as it stands now conducive enough to bounce back season on offense? This is from Stoney. Congratulations on the nuptials, by the way, Stoney. I've been tracking your weekend of boozing. It's been great to watch on the Twitters. I know he's with you coming up on the Upwards pod.
He'll be on this week.
So there you go. Shout out. But this leads us right into the question about expectations for the wide receivers. Treylon Burks, first-round draft pick. You asked me this the night of the draft. What would be reasonable? What is your expectation for Treylon Burks in year one?
Well, I mean, he's fat, so these projections are obviously not gonna work out because he is taking breaks. What I've heard is that at OTAs he's taking breaks to go in and eat a firehouse sub and then come back and try to play on a stomach when you're supposed to wait 30 minutes.
It's the animal burger from ML Rose or the Jasper Smash Burger. One of those.
Gotcha.
Two. There you go.
I mean, it's just. I mean, he's fat, out of shape, so I think all these projections are way too high.
Did anybody watch an Arkansas football game?
It doesn't seem like it, but again,
he is a big
overblown.
Boy. He's a big boy.
Apparently, he played at 244 pounds while at Arkansas, which you would never expect that he'd even affect because he never affected his game. So at this point, I don't know if I can emotionally invest in caring about the Kelvin Benjamin 2.0 narrative that is out there. I mean, he's basically what you're hearing is that he's Vincent Wolford in a wide receiver. I mean, he's just fat. He's out of shape. He can't run. He's terrible. I
hate this so much. Also, I covered Kelvin Benjamin coming out of high school. There was a knock on his work ethic all throughout his entire college career at Florida State and coming out in the draft. That has never been the problem with Treylon Burks. It's never been a thing. If you watched a game, he's a big boy. He plays big and he plays faster than his size. Just let the man be. It's freaking May. It's freaking May. Okay.
I also think that these projections are pretty realistic. I would love to see 1,000 yards, but you're talking about essentially, if you were to put this in fantasy terms, that would be a better fantasy season than what A.J. Brown had last year.
Yeah, A.J. Brown's never had more than 70 catches in a year.
Yeah.
I think you asked me on the Monday after the draft, you said, what's reasonable for Treylon Burks? And I said 55 catches, 800 yards, 5 touchdowns. If he goes over 55, over 800, and over 5 touchdowns, I think that will be a very productive first season as a professional with a clear expectation to grow the next year.
Right.
And I think that's what you want. And I think if he hits these projections that we've got up there right now, I think that's a hell of a first season for a rookie wide receiver. In a run first offense.
Right. And they'll probably put him at when they do heavy formations on the other side of probably left tackle and let him be like Aaron Brewer going out for a touchdown because he's fat. He's a fat man.
I do love a good fat guy touchdown.
Yeah.
I love a fat guy touchdown. All right, Robert Woods, who's I guess could be considered the number 1 in some situations, the number 2 in others. It's good to sort of have a 2A and 2B or a 1A and 1B like they've got. Robert Woods is a consummate professional, as we like to say on the show about all these players that get drafted like that. What are your expectations for Robert Woods? Do you like 62 receptions, 752 yards, 4 touchdowns? You think that's a little low? You think that's taking into account the ACL? What do you got?
I think that the yards per reception is about right. You're talking about 12 yards per reception. So I think the touchdowns is what is going to drive me to want to buy some Robert Woods shares because I think he'll probably be in the 6 or 7 touchdown range, which is going to make him worth owning compared to what his ADP will be, which we'll discuss in a minute. But I also think the yards is going to come up. I think what you're looking at is a Corey Davis, AJ Brown, where one is barely over 1,000 and one is just under 1,000. And I think that you can get that from either or. They may both be under 1,000, but I think him and Treylon Burks are going to have similar stat lines throughout the whole year. When it's all said and done, I think that they'll be a lot closer together when you're looking at these box score stats.
If they combine for 150 catches, 140 catches for 1,800 yards and double-digit touchdowns, I would consider that a successful season from those two players.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, what you see from Robert Woods already in May, I think that people are projecting that he's going to be a little bit slower on the uptick, like Julio Jones was, like Taylor Lewan was, like Bud Dupree was. I don't think that's going to be the case. I am fully bought in and sold, barring another injury or an aggravation of like a hamstring or something. Robert Woods is going to be day one, week one impact player straight from the get-go.
Everyone just starts immediately having migraines when you start talking about hamstring soft tissue issues with Titans wide receivers. Here, I think, is the most important thing to understand about Robert Woods. He is a significantly better football player than he is a fantasy football player.
Yeah.
That is like, there is so much more to the position than your fantasy stats. I think people know that, but I think it is worth reiterating that Robert Woods has so much value to this team that goes way above and beyond his fantasy production. Just want to throw that out there. All right.
And these fantasy productions do hinge, going back to Stoney Keeley's question, do the Titans, June 1st is right around the corner, right? So that means that they're going to get a big influx of cash from the Julio Jones cut.
That's tomorrow.
If they get Will Fuller, I don't know if these projections really change, because I think that's going to affect what you would see from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, what you see from Austin Hooper, and what you see from Kyle Phillips, more than it's going to affect these two guys. Because these two guys, barring, Treylon Burks, obviously Treylon Burks has to go on Jenny Craig before he's considered a starting wide receiver. But I think that
the way down. It needs to be the way down. We've got we've got the Remnant Fellowship down in Brentwood. Like, let's have him go down with Gwen Shamblin, R.I.P. Gwen, and have him go down there and lose some weight there, because that's what the Lord wants. The Lord wants him to play at 225.
Need to get him down, but
245.
This is the projection I have the most problem with. Is this right here is not enough, and he's also underappreciated in the fantasy world right now. Austin Hooper is a value in the fantasy world, but he's going to get more touchdowns. He is a red zone target. I mean, he is going to get so many more touchdowns than 4 touchdowns, and I think he's going to be around 600 or 700 yards.
I think now we're gonna have words in a minute about what's the proper format of a fantasy league, because I think you should have a tight end, even though the NFL
doesn't care about tight ends, and we shouldn't either.
I like I love a good tight end, Zach. Okay, I love a good tight end. And I like the fact that you can, like, there's 2 strategies, right? There's a strategy to go early on a big name guy that's going to deliver over the top statistics for that position in fantasy. And then there's sort of like just wait until the end and draft 2 of them and see which one you can kind of like stream in and out of the lineup if you have a mandatory tight end position here. So I think that's interesting. I think he is absolutely one of those guys I would be targeting later if I waited on tight ends, because I agree with you. If you get to, that's about what, like 3-4 catches a game, 30-40 yards a game, and a touchdown every 3 games. I think that's serviceable fantasy production if you're not going to take a tight end in the first 5 rounds or whatever, like, and use up lots of draft capital to draft one of those guys. So I like him. I'm with you. I like the over, especially in the red zone. I would go 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, I just am so shocked that this is the stat line for this, because you're basically saying that's not much of an upgrade over Jeff Swain. Which, in all honesty, Austin Hooper is the best of every tight end that played last year. Ferkser,
not even close.
I mean, they're all, he's the best out of all of them. And this is a stat line that is very pedestrian. I think that he is going to be heavily involved in this offense, especially in the red zone. And I think that he's going to surpass not only all of this, but I think he's going to surpass his fantasy value.
Here. So let's go into the fantasy value here, because I think what could be interesting, and it would hurt their fantasy value, the fact that because you are all on Nick Westbrook-Ikhine needs more love, right? That's the train you're on, right? Like, we got to give NWI some more love. Wide receiver 1, we got to give him some love. Austin Hoop, I think Chigakonku is the same way. I think the better NWI and Chigakonku are, that the worse that they make everyone else's fantasy numbers. But I think it makes your offense better if those are productive pieces. So when we start talking about fantasy, if you're in a dynasty league, it's worth drafting. Treylon Burks pretty early, but otherwise, there's one dude on this team to own, and that's about it. Really.
I could make some arguments for based on value, like specifically Ryan Tannehill right here. He's right now going in the 12th round as quarterback 22. And he was still quarterback 12 in 2021. In 2020, he's quarterback 7. That is tremendous value. And if you are in a one quarterback league, you should be waiting to draft a quarterback anyway. And if you're talking about getting Ryan Tannehill in the 12th round versus getting I would say maybe Lamar Jackson in the 3rd or 4th, because that's how high some of these guys are going. I think in all honesty, unless you're in a Tennessee Titans driven fan league where the majority are Titans fans, you could probably get Ryan Tannehill in the 14th. I think that's how low the fantasy community will be on Ryan Tannehill, his pass catchers, based on, and the general fan who remembers 2021, even though he finished quarterback 12.
Yeah, I think that's probably very undervalued that he was quarterback 12 even in a statistically bad year for the offense, that he still was a top 15 starting quarterback. I think you're right that there's tremendous value there. Now, I play in a 2-quarterback system where we have 10 teams and like keepers, and the quarterbacks fly up boards. Like you have to draft quarterbacks like 1st, 2nd, 3rd round. You're drafting at least one quarterback.
Yeah, when your league is constructed like that, you have to take quarterbacks fairly early. And that's why the NFL only starts one quarterback. Didn't know if you were aware of that or not.
Well, if you have anything 12 teams or more, you can't play 2 quarterbacks.
Right.
But if you are under 12 teams, then I think to make it more difficult, you need to start a second quarterback. Is that like if you have a 10-team league, to make it more difficult, I think you need the second guy, because that's I don't know. Like, am I wrong on this? Like, you have to. I love having 2 starting quarterbacks.
I just don't. I try to stay away from 10-team leagues. I would give me 12. 12 is traditional. 12 is good.
I would agree.
It's a perfect number.
I would agree.
If you don't have 2 more friends to get into your league, that says a lot more about the 10 of you than it does anything else.
All right, you are invited to our expert keeper league where you have to have 6 IDPs. You have mandatory tight end and 2 starting quarterbacks. And you know how hard that league is to win?
Probably fairly easy.
It's all expert. Well, then come on in, big boy. Let's see what you got. Come on in. Let's see what you can.
That sounds like a horribly constructed team that would drive me nuts. I would hate that.
Well, I had AJ.
What's the point of that?
Because the defensive players are fun too. Like they matter.
They don't. They matter. It's like saying kickers matter. Get rid of kickers. Get rid of team defense. I'm all for just eliminating those. Fantasy football is about scoring points and having fun, not about the doldrums of picking defensive players.
So when Jayon Brown, I think won me a championship against the Colts 2 years ago. I want to say, remember when he had that game against the Colts where he had the interception, the sack, the return for a touchdown, the whole deal, and I scored like 25 points with Jayon Brown, and I think I won because I was like week 16 or 17, and I win a championship because Jayon Brown carried me to victory. I just don't think you should poo-poo the defensive players as much as you are.
Yeah, I'm just not interested in that. That's a boring story. We are going to move to Derrick Henry, who's being drafted as running back 2 in the 1st round. And he was running back. He still was a RB2 in fantasy football, and he was only out half the year. I think that in PPR leagues, half-point PPR leagues or full-point PPR leagues, I think that you're looking, even though he's RB2 right here, I still think that probably RB5 is the way to go. I'm not drafting Christian McCaffrey over Derrick Henry. I will say that right now on record. I am out on drafting Christian McCaffrey in the 1st round. I think it's ridiculous to trust your fantasy football season in the 1st round, that 1st round draft pick, for a guy that can't stay healthy now 2 or 3 years in a row.
I mean, I have come like I was the guy for 25 years of playing fantasy football. I went running back. Like that's how I built my roster almost every time. You got to get a starting running back. You probably need a really good second running back. You're probably going to take a 3rd and a 4th one in the first 6 or 7 rounds. And now when I see a 1st round pick and the risk of injury for every single one of these guys, including Derrick Henry, it's give me Devontae Adams. Give me somebody that I know is going to give me 17 weeks, basically 16, 17 games of wide receiver 1 type production. But I do like I would take Derrick Henry in the first round. Like I'm with you. I would not take Christian McCaffrey over him. I feel comfortable because there's not any more RB1s that are like true guys that you're
Jonathan
going to get.
Taylor is probably the closest guy, right? And they're already hyping up Naheem Hines again, which they kind of got away from Naheem Hines last year. But 2 years ago, they used Naheem Hines when they had a quarterback like Phillip Rivers. They used Naheem Hines a ton, and it hurt Jonathan Taylor's fantasy value. And Jonathan Taylor only had good games in his rookie year against shitty ass defenses. Now, I think they're going to start going back because they got Matt Ryan, and they need to give Matt Ryan. They're going to run via the swing and
Yeah.
all that, the swing pass and
Do you,
screen pass.
what about Najee Harris?
I love Najee Harris. I'm all in on Najee Harris.
Yep.
If I'm kind of with you. I want to go wide receiver, running back, and if I were to hopefully have a running back in like Najee Harris in round 2, I'd be all over it. I don't think he'll last a round 2, but
No, I don't think so.
maybe last year's disappointing rookie season, people will kind of forget about him.
Didn't he catch like 75 passes?
He caught a lot of passes, which I knew he's always going to catch a lot of passes. I was really big on Najee Harris last year.
Oh yeah, I was too.
And I don't think I got him in any of my fantasy leagues. And I was very disappointed.
In my stupid league with IDPs and 2 quarterbacks, which by the way, half point for reception is the right number.
And we get that.
We agree with that the half point is the right number. But I love Najee Harris a lot. Is there anybody else who else would you take before or ahead of or after Derrick Henry? Like where is Derrick Henry on your big board of just running backs?
I would think that Derrick Henry for me is probably running back 2. If I had to really deep dive into it, I had to admit that
Jonathan Taylor.
I think I would have to admit that Jonathan Taylor is going to be number 1.
Derrick Henry 2.
Yeah.
Najee Harris 3. McCaffrey 3. Who you got at 3? Who am I missing?
I think Aaron Jones is a sneaky number 3 and a sneaky guy to put into your rotation because there's no Devontae Adams. And I think that when you get a lot of receptions like you do, I think that Aaron Jones could be up there. I'm not too sure on where I ranked it Dalvin Cook in all this too, because he's another running back. And when it's all said and done,
I'd be worried about AJ Dillon vulturing more carries than because Aaron Jones continues to get hurt and he continues to get like these little nicks and bruises, and he's not a particularly large man, but he plays really hard. I'd go Najee Harris over Aaron Jones.
I would think Eckler and Mixon are in that next tier from Derrick Henry too, because I think Eckler and Mixon are both going to be able to get you top 10 performances at the end of the year.
Yeah. Kenneth chimes in on YouTube. Najee getting some local heat too, saying he looks like Eddie Lacy 2.0. That's just mean spirited. So it's not just Treylon Burks catching heat, which is of course a perfect segue into Treylon Burks. I love drafted rookies. I like drafting rookies at all positions. I like, especially in our keeper league where we get to keep guys. They always go up. I've got Jalen Waddle on my team from last year. I drafted him. I'm going to keep him. I love drafting rookies. So I actually love drafting Treylon Burks. I think you need to assume that he is a wide receiver 3, best case scenario, maybe a flex guy. I think that's where I would put him.
Yeah, if you're looking at wide receiver 33 and he's in the 7th round, I feel like those numbers don't jive, but the fantasy football is starting to mirror what the league is moving to, and the league is moving to more 3 wide receiver sets. So I don't think I would personally draft Treylon Burks in the 7th round. I think I would draft actually Robert Woods ahead of Treylon Burks, but I don't discourage anybody for taking that chance on Treylon Burks because he is the future, especially if you're in a dynasty league, especially if you're in a keeper league. That could prove to be the way to go. You know, in 2019, I don't even think AJ Brown draft position was even that high. I think that's even a higher ADP than what AJ Brown had coming into his rookie year. So I think that's it. It's something about it. I'm just like, I'm selling on that.
I think it depends on how the board unfolds and if you're in a league with a bunch of Titans homers.
Right.
If you are not, like, my league is not a bunch of Titans fans. It's a bunch of like industry people, and I think they're going to have him pegged like you do, which is down a round or 2, probably, right?
Right.
I would probably then move him up a round because I like the risk of rookies. I like taking the risk in a keeper league on rookies. So I'll be all over Treylon Burks. If I want the production right now, this year out of a fourth wide receiver, then I probably am with you. I'd probably go with Robert Woods because I think Woods is a safer play on a week in, week out, catch a couple touchdowns, upside kind of play where if I'm looking for 4 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, right, out of your fourth receiver, I think Robert Woods is more likely to do that consistently where Burks is going to be more up and down. That would be my guess.
I'm looking. I'd like to look for Julian Edelman type players that may get like 50 yards and a touchdown, right? Because ultimately, if he does that every week, and then some weeks where he doesn't get touchdowns, he's getting a lot of yards, or he's getting a lot of receptions, that equals out throughout. You want the consistency, and to me, Robert Woods a round later is better consistency and better value than Treylon Burks around earlier, where you do go through the up and downs of a rookie wide receiver season because he's not Jamar Chase, right? He's not Justin Jefferson. And those guys in my league of record were both drafted roughly around the 8th or 9th round. And I think that is the appropriate response for Robert Woods.
I mean, 5 catches for 60 yards is basically 75 receptions for 1,000 yards.
Right.
Like that's A.J. Brown's average year in Tennessee. So if Robert Woods accomplishes that, I think that's great. But there'll be some bad games for him. But I see the consistency more with him being more valuable, whereas in a keeper league, I like the risk reward factor for Treylon Burks. And we've already touched on Austin Hooper a little bit as a tight end. I think he's going to be really good value in most fantasy leagues, especially if you wait on tight ends altogether and you don't want to take one. I think he's going to give you good value.
Yeah, there's no reason that if you're in a tight end mandatory league because you're still in the Stone Age that you don't take Austin Hooper if he's sitting there in the 16th round. Ultimately, I typically go kicker defense 15th to 16th round, but the last 2 rounds of the draft. But even at the 14th round with Austin Hooper, he will finish higher than tight end 25. He will finish as tight end 12 or higher because that's just what the Tennessee Titans will do. He'll get touchdowns. And tight ends are so volatile from year to year that unless you get one of the top 3 or 4, you're not going to know who's going to be on the top 12 this year. And I think he will be, though.
So my league is boring because we have 6 IDPs, 2 quarterbacks, a mandatory tight end, and 4 keepers.
Yeah.
And 10 teams.
It's just
25 rounds in our draft. Keepers. And you think that's boring. I think your league is basic, dude. Like basic, like it's too hard to find tight ends. Only one. My dog could play in a 1 quarterback league. Like a 1 quarterback league, that's too easy. That's too simple.
Yeah, but I'm also in a 12-team league. I'm in a 12-team league with we trade draft picks. We have keepers based on value and all that stuff goes up. And we also have
what's your keeper
first downs.
What's your keeper protocol?
Basically, where you draft them the first year, you get it, and then it goes divide that by half the next year. Oh. So, for example, I had Antonio Gibson. I drafted Antonio Gibson, and then he was I think I drafted him in the 12th or the 14th, and then I kept him in the 12th or 14th last year. And if I kept him again this year, he'd be in like the 6th round.
Interesting. Okay, see, that's different. Can you only keep him twice? Or one time?
No, you can keep them as many times as you want, but ultimately it will be a 1st-round pick, and you have to have a pick in the round. You can't trade away that pick, so you have to have a pick in that round.
See, it took us a long time, but we found some agreement, which is you excuse me, you keep a player where you draft him, but you have to have a draft pick to keep that player. We can only keep players twice, and then you have to put them back in the pot. So you can draft Alvin Kamara in the 24th round and keep him twice, but then he's got to go back into the pot.
Yeah, I have a league that you goes up every year 1 round, and then when you get into the 1st round, they become a 1st-round keeper. You have to let them go. So anybody you drafted in the 1st round last year goes back into the 1st round.
It sounds like what we need to settle this is a football show, fantasy football league that's a hybrid mix of the two, your philosophy and my philosophy, and we'll see what people like. Stoney's invited. Broadway Sports Media folks are invited. 440s folks are invited. The listeners are invited.
And to touch on this, if you're not doing 0.5 PPR, first off, you're in a standard league, you better have some kind of different scoring, right? We do league meetings for my league of record, and it got to the point where I have fought and argued for PPR. I have fought and argued for 0.5 PPR about 4 or 5 seasons. I just kind of gave up. And then suddenly the influx of the first down, given points for first downs came in, which is essentially
I don't like
PPR, by the way.
I know.
But it's great. So we did it 1 year, and it was 0.5 for quarterbacks, 0.5 for wide receivers, and 1 for running backs. And now we've shifted that to 0.25 for quarterbacks because they kind of got the quarterback, scoring a little
for
bit out of whack.
completion.
Yeah,
Oh,
for
my
completion
God.
for first down.
Oh, for first down. Okay.
So
you only count half a point for PPR for first downs?
we don't have PPR at all. It's just first down points. So 0.5 for first down for a wide receiver because they get it from the quarterback, right? So
okay. All right.
The wide receiver has to do a lot of the work. So 0.25 for passing.
Wow. So we do half a point per reception for all players. So if you catch 12 passes, you get 6 points.
I prefer that.
That's what we do. The other one that I hate that I think is ridiculous, the 100-yard bonus and the 300-yard bonus.
I haven't done that since the early 2000s.
That's the dumbest. Like, I ran for 98 yards and you ran for 102, but you're going to score way more points than me. Like, that's the stupidest thing ever. So I half a point for PPR, no yardage bonuses. That's where we're at.
I didn't even know there were still leagues that do yardage bonuses anymore.
And respect defensive players, okay? Respect them. No. They impact the game. And this Titans team loaded with good IDPs, okay?
Yeah, I'm out on them. I don't need to be researching ADPs and on IDPs and all that kind of stuff. I'm in too many leagues to worry about the shitty stuff that doesn't really matter in fantasy.
Oh, come on. That's all I heard Zach say there, folks, you Titans fans, is that Jeffrey Simmons doesn't matter to the game.
He does not matter to the game of fantasy football.
Doesn't matter to the game. Well, do you want fantasy football to look like real football, or do you want it to be a joker thing that like all of our moms
rosters should be made up for the rosters for the offense of your fantasy football team should be as closely as close to the roster of an actual NFL team, because that's how
defense. So defense.
No, I said the offense. You got to listen to what I'm saying. You're excluding words. Offense, the offensive roster. Because offense is what drives fantasy football, not defense.
So no offensive line, no pancake blocks, no holding call.
I would never draft offensive linemen. I would never be in a league where you have to draft.
Even though they're way more important than all the other players you draft on your offense.
No,
don't need a. Okay.
Don't care about them.
IDPs are for real fantasy football players. All right, let's get to the SEC. The meetings are coming up. All of the coaches will be there. We got a seating chart. Jimbo Fisher is sitting, apparently, now if this is true, he is sitting with no other coaches at the meetings today and tomorrow. Greg Sankey's going to have availability on Wednesday evening. Some of the things that you can expect, they're going to talk a ton, Zach, about name, image, and likeness. People's eyes roll back in their heads now when you talk about it. Here's all you need to know. They're going to talk a lot, and they're not going to have any answers for name, image, and likeness. I think they're going to come out of this week saying, man, we spent a lot of time on this thing and didn't figure a damn thing out. I think is what they're going to say when it comes to NIL. I do think they're going to have some really serious conversations about scheduling, about divisions, and about how they're going to lay out the conference moving forward with Texas and Oklahoma set to join in a few years. I think we actually could get a couple of announcements this week on where they're thinking and where their heads are at as far as this. From what I understand and who I've talked to, the scheduling model is the most important thing that they are going to talk about this weekend. And you cannot bring Texas and Oklahoma into the SEC and keep divisions the way they are. They're going to have to do away with divisions. The 3 and 6 model is my personal favorite. You can also do a 1 and 7, but I do not see how you can put 8 teams in one division, 8 teams in another division, play 8 conference games, and never play the other division for 12 years or 14 years. I don't see how you do that.
Yeah, Ross Dillinger put out something at side.com, and he has what he thought would be every team's permanent 3 SEC opponents that rotated through the other 6 in your 9-game model, which is my preferred method too. I think it's the best method. I think it's kind of crazy that they're split directly down the middle among the SEC teams about where they land on the 9-game versus the 8-game. I'm looking at it right here. Alabama is Auburn, Tennessee, LSU. Tennessee is Vanderbilt.
He stole all this from me, by the way. He stole all this from me.
Oh, he did? He did. You wrote this article?
No, I put out the 3 permanent opponents for everybody about a week and a half ago.
Gotcha.
And it did not have LSU and Alabama on there. but like this is the way we're going, and
And this
it's
is the
going to be
way it should
impossible.
go.
It's going to be impossible to read all of them. So go check out the
No,
Twitter
I was
account.
just going to say those two because I'm looking at it from a perspective of why Tennessee for Alabama. I get Auburn, I get LSU, but I feel like a different team that's coming in, maybe Texas or Oklahoma or even Georgia, would
Oklahoma
be
would be
better
my
suited for Alabama, I think, to build a new rivalry.
so Oklahoma would be my vote with Alabama.
Yeah.
And I think you're right to ask about Tennessee Bama. So here's what I would say is the goal here. You want balance. You want to protect some really important rivalries, right? Like the Egg Bowl, like the Iron Bowl, like the cocktail party. There are certain things you want to protect. And then you basically want the SEC, from what I've been told, they want to play everybody as often as possible. This is why they're doing this. And so they don't care as much about who gets into their championship game 1 and 2 because they have great teams in that championship game all the time. But every other conference is worried about that. They want to put their best teams into that game so that it drives ratings. Here's all you really need to know about the 8 or 9 game thing. The coaches have no say. And what makes more money? 9 games to your season ticket holders, 9 games to your TV partners, or 8?
Right. I'm kind of looking at this too, with the Tennessee, get rid of Alabama and put in Florida for that. Why wouldn't you have Florida and Tennessee? Vanderbilt and South Carolina makes sense geographically, and it kind of makes sense in trying to build maybe some new rivalries. And I think that Vanderbilt and Tennessee, they kind of play each other pretty close typically over the last few years. They're a lot closer than what people think. But I think that you would have to have Florida and Tennessee in there.
Yes, Florida, Tennessee would be protected well before Alabama and Tennessee would be.
Right.
But this goes to your question. If you are over the age of 40, you probably view Alabama as the primary rival for Tennessee. If you are under the age of 40, which I still am, then you probably view Florida as the primary rival.
I don't think Alabama fans consider UT a rivalry.
I
think that matters for when it comes into rivalry is what are you really viewed as that? Because Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens, are they the rivalry or is it the Ravens and the Steelers? Like nobody really is a rival with Cleveland. I feel like not even the Bengals. I think they were at a certain point just because they were both shitty. But now the Bengals are coming in and joining the big boys.
I would say here's what I think is going to happen with this. I think the SEC will protect Tennessee, Alabama, but I don't think they should.
Yeah.
That's what my prognostication would be. I do not think LSU, Alabama needs to be protected. Again, keep in mind with this model, you're going to play every other team twice every 4 years.
Right.
So you're still going to play all 15 teams in the league 2 times every 4 seasons. So you're playing everybody all the time. So it's not, I'm okay with a little imbalance, right? I'm okay with Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Ole Miss, the quote unquote lower tier teams. I'm okay with them having easier permanent opponents to some degree because they're not sort of like the national championship programs, and the rest of the schedule is going to balance itself out. So I think if I was Tennessee, when I did this exercise, I projected Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt, Tennessee. Those would be the 3. But I could easily take Alabama away and put in Kentucky, take out Alabama and put in South Carolina, take out Alabama, put in Georgia. The beauty of this model is that you get to create a lot of new rivalries on top of protecting the old ones, and finding that balance is the key. So I think it's going to look great, dude. I can't wait. I think divisions are so stupid.
Right. I think it's going to be tremendous to have this, hopefully, the 9-game schedule.
9-game schedule, no divisions, 3 and 6, play everybody every 4 years twice. And here's the only drawback is you could have some weird tiebreakers. If you've got a 2, 3, and 4 that are all tied with the same record, but only 2 of them played each other, how do you figure out the tiebreaker? So there's going to have to be some really clear and hopefully thoughtful tiebreakers.
There's an issue with the home games, right? You alternate having less home games every other year.
Let me ask you this, and maybe you're the wrong guy to ask about this. I don't know. Like Florida, Georgia, if you protect that one, you already are guaranteeing a neutral site game and 4 and 4, right? 4 home, 4 road for Florida and Georgia. Technically, right now, Arkansas and A&M play almost every year in Arlington and Jerry World, so that would be an easy 4 and 4 for those two. Would you be okay with a neutral site game for everybody, or is that too much corporate sponsorship? And Or do you would you rather have the imbalance or a neutral site game? I guess is my question.
I think it depends on which game you're protecting and doing that with. I think that the Iron Bowl just doesn't make sense not to have one in Alabama next year in Auburn, one in
Even though
Alabama next year in Auburn.
They did play in Birmingham for a lot of years.
Yeah, I'm not with that. I want the home field advantage. I want the college atmosphere that I think you get at these bigger games. So but if it's Alabama, Tennessee, and they played in Nashville, that'd be great. I'd be fine neutral, Alabama, Tennessee, neutral.
Okay. I think presidents and local economies, which are the ones making this decision, the presidents and the ADs, not the coaches, by the way, I think they're going to go towards the extra home game every other year because that generates revenue for your community and for your business. Whereas neutral, you're sort of losing that ability. And to your point, I agree, you're losing all the charm.
Right.
What's the point of having the Grove if you're going to play a game in, Memphis?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So I'm with you on that. I do think that's tricky, but over time that evens out, right? Florida and Georgia do it right now.
Yeah.
Florida and Georgia have 3 home games and 4 road games. They alternate that every year, and Georgia.
Nobody really cares, right?
Nobody even knows.
Nobody ever brings it up.
Right. It doesn't come up. So other leagues have figured it out. I think also this is going to happen everywhere. I think divisions are going to go away in every conference. And it's more important for them because they need to put better teams into the playoff. The SEC doesn't have that problem. They're not worried about that. So just imagine 9 conference games in a single 16-team division. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah,
it's going to be awesome.
It's going to be amazing. I'm all in. Yeah, I'm all in.
It's going to be great. And remember, all of this is about playoff expansion, conference expansion, new TV contract. It's all tied together. They're going to try to have it all happen at the same time. So 2024, probably, where they're going to negotiate for Texas and Oklahoma to come. Then the playoffs going to expand the same year, and the new scheduling will probably kick in the same year. So it's probably all going to happen, but it's probably not all going to happen for a couple of years. So there you go. Otherwise, let's just hope Jimbo and Nick get into some.
We need it. I need it.
I need it. I want Lane Kiffin tweeting all the time, live tweeting.
I'm already mad that in the seating chart that Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban are not directly across the table from each other.
Okay, if this is true, if this is real, this is literally what they've got in a row. They've got Greg Sankey and David Cutcliffe. David Cutcliffe now works in the front office of the SEC with Jimbo Fisher, William King, Mark Womack, John McDavid, and Herb Vincent. It is all front office people and Jimbo Fisher on one side of the table, and then all the coaches are around the other side. Why Jimbo Fisher was isolated with all the bosses, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So funny. It's so funny. Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin sitting right next to each other. That's great. I like that. Billy Napier and Kirby Smart right next to each other. Florida and Georgia. That could be interesting. 2 former Saban assistants sitting next to each other.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out.
Going to be a lot of fun. Special thanks to the Kingston Group. Special thanks to Broadway Sports Media. Special thanks to Football and Other Efforts podcast. You can hear that, of course, coming out on Wednesday this week with Stoney Keeley. Shout out to Stoney. Congratulations on the wedding, my man. Listen to all the other great shows across the 440 Sports Network. And we'll be back in studio. I know we've said this a million times, but eventually we will actually be back in studio. On Thursday is the hopeful moment in time that takes place. IDPs are people too. Yep. We appreciate you guys. Rate, review, subscribe, click all the buttons, check out the YouTube page, listen to all the pods. We love you. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. For Zach, I'm Braden. This has been a football show.